Chapter 1. They were like dark specters riding on radiant streaming sunbeams from the half-orb of morning sun as it peeked over the ridge, early gray dawn melting into a pale blue sky behind it. There were 5 riders cresting the ridge, dark shapes on galloping horses plunging onto the incline of the sharp embankment that led down to an expansive, lush meadow of cropgrass below. Duster tails were flapping in the breeze caused by the speed of their galloping mounts. The riders leaned back hard in the saddle, reins outstretched to the limits, trying to retain their balance, giving their mounts their heads as they stretched their necks far out in front of them, aligning the back of their necks with the backbone of their spines, spreading their bodies into a straight line from head to rear. Iron-shod hooves dug into the moist sod, and wet foot-high gamma grass entwined about their fetlocks, slowing their descent. The shade of the morning sun behind the ridge had still left the slope slick from morning dew. As the riders came barreling down the hillside, they were no longer strung out side by side, but randomly sliding from left to right and drifting into a haphazard alignment with some riders in front and others behind or slightly close to the others. As the riders approached halfway down the hill, another group of riders topped the ridge. There were about a dozen riders, and they all had guns out and were firing at the 5 riders ahead of them. The fleeing riders were too intent on making their way down the embankment to fire back. Their weapons were still holstered. The first rider to negotiate the foot of the hill and ride out into the meadow before the others was smaller than the rest of the riders. This rider was riding an Ovaro, a black and white pinto. And unlike the others, this rider did not wear a duster. Long auburn hair streamed from beneath a black Stetson tied on with a chin strap. She wore a red and white checkered shirt and blue denim trousers. She was known as the notorious outlaw, Wildcat Kitty, and she was the reputed leader of the gang known as the Wildcat Gang. The members of the Wildcat Gang consisted of Kitty's grandfather, who was a big, elderly man on a chestnut mare. He was known as the legendary Cyclone Kid. Also in the gang were Arapaho Brown, another tough old man who still had the bark on and rode a big gray stallion. Chief Henry Two Owls and Kitty's brother, Jeremy Carlin, rounded out the rest of the gang. As the Wildcat Gang rode into the meadow, flying lead was all around them as the pursuing riders advanced down the hill behind them. Bullets were coming much too close now, and one clipped the loose part of Cyclone's duster sleeve. Pointing to the left, urging his companions to ride that way into the meadow, Cyclone hauled up on the mare's reins, pulling her to a sliding halt in the dew-slicked grass. He wheeled her around as he slid his Winchester from the rifle boot that rested beneath the saddle fender and his right thigh. Bringing the rifle up shoulder high, he fired one handed at his pursuers. One rider took the hit and spilled from his saddle, falling to the ground and rolling down the hill. The riders behind rode him over before slowing their pace. Cyclone had wheeled his horse back to follow after the others, only to find them turning back toward him. Farther down the meadow, another group of riders were heading toward them. They also had their guns out and were firing. The Wildcats had no choice but to ride the other direction. They knew it wasn't a good choice, but was the only option available to them. They dug their spurs hard into their horses' flanks and whipped them wildly with the excess length of reins. The horses responded with galloping speed. As the Wildcats sped on, they could see the meadow narrowing off. They knew that it would eventually pinch off into a narrow canyon. Getting trapped in there would mean their finish, but with their pursuers merging in from 2 sides, they had no other choice. The firing behind them began to subside as the Wildcats increased their lead. With the canyon entrance looming not far up ahead, the pursuers probably saw no need to waste ammunition nor push their horses harder. Once in the canyon, the Wildcats would be trapped. As the meadow began to disappear, the ground became harder and rocky until the trail wound into the mouth of the canyon. The canyon floor was strewn with boulders and smaller rocks. Mounds of shale had piled up at the bottom of the walls as years of corrosion had splintered off chunks of rock that broke to dust as they hit bottom. The Wildcats had barely entered the canyon and traversed about 100 feet into the high-walled rocky canyon when gunfire erupted in front of them from within farther down the canyon. Bullets hailed around them and ricocheted off the rock walls around them. The firing came from high up the canyon walls from both sides, where the ambushers were hidden behind rock cover. The Cyclone Kid motioned for the others to hold up. They leaped from their horses' backs and sent them running on through the canyon. Cyclone, however, had managed to retrieve the saddlebags from the big chestnut mare before joining the others to take cover behind some large boulders at the side of the trail. Bullets trailed after them, but they all made it to cover without a scratch. They quickly took up positions behind the rocks, guns ready to fire at the attackers from both directions. Firing from inside the canyon ceased. The Wildcats held their fire and waited. The sound of horses' hooves was coming closer from outside the canyon. Light filtering in from the entrance of the canyon flickered as the shapes of riders and horses filled the opening. The riders had halted, none of them inclined to enter the canyon, nor did they see a need to. "Cyclone Kid!" a Spanish-sounding voice rang out. "We have you trapped, senor. You wish to make it easy on yourselves and give yourselves up, or do we have to kill you?" "You'll probably kill us anyways, Manuel," Cyclone shouted back. "We might as well take some of you with us. For sure, I'm taking you down." "That's mighty big talk from a fat old man," Manuel responded. Cyclone glanced to the others. Kitty was pressing close to him. She nodded affirmative. So did the others. Cyclone always knew where his companions stood with him. He answered back to Manuel. "Come on and try me." "Oh, Senor Cyclone," Manuel chided with a whine. "Do not make us kill you. You know all we want is the money." "Then you'll kill us after you get it," Cyclone came back. "Why would I want to do that, my old friend, Cyclone? Why, you're just like a grandfather to me. You're too old to be my father. Do you even know who your father is, Manuel?" "Quien sabe? I don't even know who my mother is. But no matter. I am happy with whiskey and women. But, alas, I need money for that. So if you just give me the money that Senor Gunderson gave you, I'll let you live." "What if I told you we didn't get the money?" Cyclone yelled. "I wouldn't believe you, my old friend. I saw with my own eyes that he gave it to you. It's in those saddlebags you have." Cyclone turned to Kitty. "He's going for it." Then back to Manuel, he shouted, "How about we split it? Times have been tough. We really need the dough." "How about I just kill you?" Manuel's voice still sounded jovial. "Well, now that you mention it, Manuel, that don't sound like a good idea." "All right then, senor. I really do hate to have to kill you. And your pretty granddaughter. It would be such a shame to kill a beautiful girl like that. But if that is the way you want it, friend, we'll all start shooting again until you are all dead." "Wait a minute, Manuel," Cyclone answered. He tried to put a bit of a stammer in it. "You promise you won't kill us if we give you the money?" "Cyclone! Cyclone! All these years, we've been friends. Of course I won't kill you. All I want is the money. It won't hurt none. You can always get more money. And I bet you'd come along to take that away too." Cyclone glanced at the others. They were all smiling. "Of course, amigo. All the more reason for me to let you live. Give me more money." "Well, if I give this money to you now, it'll be the last time you take any more." "Don't say that, my friend, or I may not have a reason to let you live. I could change my mind," Manuel warned. Cyclone didn't answer. He waited out the silence. "Senor, why you not answer me?" I'm thinking, Cyclone shouted back. "Do not think too long, my friend. You might think yourself dead." Impatience was starting to creep into Manuel's words. All right, Cyclone answered. You promise that after you get the money, you'll let us go? Sigh, Manuel answered. I'll just toss the saddlebags out. You pick them up and ride out, Cyclone said. No, 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 my friend, Manuel said, grinning. First, you toss your guns out. Then you step out into the canyon where I can see you. Bring the money with you. Cyclone waited a beat. He didn't want this to look too easy. Then said, All right, you win. Here comes our guns. The guns clattered on the rock floor as each of the wildcats tossed them out. They stepped out from behind the rocks into the center of the canyon trail. Riders from outside rode into the canyon, bunching up close and cropping out any light protruding from the outside. Footsteps crunched in the rocky trail behind them as the gunmen from the interior of the canyon came up behind them. In a matter of seconds, the wildcats were completely surrounded by men with guns at the ready. They were a hard lot of gun hands, disheveled and dirty. They were mostly Anglo with a few Spanish mixed in. Manuel and his riders pushed in close around them, all remaining in their saddles as the horses bunched the riders together within the close confines of the canyon walls. The riders were all Caucasian except for Manuel. Even as a minority, the Spaniard was obviously in charge. Manuel sat loosely in the saddle, brandishing his six-gun as if it weighed nothing. It waved back and forth, taking in the whole group of captives. He was a broad-shouldered man with an ample belly. His gaudy, flowered shirt hung loosely about his swarthy body and carried the grime and sweat of many days without washing. He had gleaming, large teeth that filled his small mouth. They were extremely yellowed, but appeared white beneath his dark drooping mustache and dark tanned complexion. Several days' growth of black beard stubble covered his sallow cheeks. It's so good to see you again, my friend Cyclone, he said jovially. Cyclone and the others had their hands raised. The saddlebags were slung over Cyclone's broad right shoulder. And you too, Mr. Rapaho, Manuel continued. He was relishing this moment too much. Not half as much as I'll be glad to see you next time, Rap said flatly. No idle threat in his tone, just a statement with a promise underlying it. Then to Kitty, he said with a smiling leer, It is especially good to see you too, senorita. I have heard much about the Wildcat girl. You are not a disappointment to me. I like my women to be a little feisty. Forget it, Chili Pepper, Kitty warned. I'm just a mite feistier than you want. So put your ideas away out of sight. And by the way, you are a disappointment to me. You stink much worse than I heard about you. Aw, Pepita, you insult me. I am deeply hurt. Obviously he wasn't. Let's get this palavering over with, Cyclone interjected with impatience. You came for the money. Well, it's right here. He patted the saddlebags. They bulged with content. You gonna take it and ride out of here and leave us alone, or are you going to just sit there and stink us to death? Ah, Cyclone, I see we are still good friends. He grinned broadly, hefted his pistol thoughtfully, then dropped it back into its holster. He dismounted and stepped close to his prisoners. He reached out for the saddlebags. Cyclone let them slide from his shoulder and thrust them out toward his captor. Manuel snatched them out of Cyclone's hands. The weight of them surprised him, and his arms sagged. He grinned again and hefted the bags up and down, verifying the weight. He smiled broadly. Now that wasn't so hard, was it, my friend? Manuel jibed. Now that you got it, Manuel, how about getting away from here and let us be? Cyclone snapped. Do not be in such a hurry, senor, Manuel said. First, I must make sure this is the money. Of course it is, you nitwit. Do you think we would have gone to all this trouble to save it if it wasn't? Cyclone cackled. Manuel was already unbuckling the saddlebag straps. He flipped the flap over and peered inside. He smiled broadly. I always knew I could trust you, my friend, Manuel said, as he gazed on the bundle of money inside. Sure you did, Cyclone agreed sarcastically. That is why I know it is all there, amigo, don't I? Of course, it is all there, Cyclone said. We didn't have time to spend it. You know that. You were on our tail 5 minutes after Gunderson gave it to me. Then you don't mind if I count it, amigo? Manuel said, rummaging through the bag, feeling of the bundles of cash inside. If you can count, go ahead. Aw, sigh. Once again, I am hurt. Of course I can count. 6 bullets in my pistola. 5 of you. I can count enough. He pulled a bundle of cash from the saddlebags and glanced at it. A thought glinted in his eye. The glint turned to suspicion as he looked back at Cyclone. He draped the bags over his left wrist and arm so he could hold the bundle in his hand and leaf through the bundle with his other hand. His eyes turned dark, their black centers matching the stubble on his cheeks as he flicked his fingers through the pieces of paper. He dropped the bundle back inside the pouch. He drew his pistol and waved it under Cyclone's chin. His lips curled into a snarl. What is this, my friend? He tipped the saddlebags up and let the contents fall out onto the ground at Cyclone's feet. You try to make a fool out of Manuel? I can't take credit for that. Nature done beat me to it. What's the matter? Not enough money for you? That was all I could squeeze out of that tightwad, Gunderson. You don't like the take. You take that up with him. You thought you could fool Manuel, Manuel said, as if he heard nothing from Cyclone. Now where is the money, senor? Manuel was getting very angry by now. What are you talking about? It's right there at your feet. Right in plain sight. No, it isn't. There is money only on the outsides of the packets. There is nothing but paper in between. Now I ask you again, my friend, where is the rest of it? I don't rightly know what's going on here, Manuel, Cyclone appealed. There was supposed to be 20,000 in there. If it's not, Gunderson pulled a fast one on me. You mind if I take a look at the money? He was already starting to squat, reaching for a bundle of cash. Manuel stepped back without saying a word. He pulled the hammer of his weapon back into place. Cyclone heard the click as he picked up a bundle and slowly straightened up. He examined the bundle, his brow creased, deepening the furrowed lines already etched there. Dirty, lying, cheatin' weasel, Cyclone cursed and threw the bundle hard into the dirt. The band around the bundle broke open and the papers spilled out. What is it, Cy? Arapaho exclaimed, shuffling closer and ignoring the big Mexican holding the gun. That lying skunk Gunderson hoodwinked us. That's what's the matter, Cyclone fumed. He done phonied up those bundles to make us think he paid us all the money for the silver we give him. That dirty double-crosser. Wait till I get a hold of that cheatin' horny toad. Chief had bent down and picked up a bundle. He held it close to eyes, which were covered with inch-thick lenses. Me no see what matter. Bad white man wampun? No good? Course it's no good. Any fool can see that plain enough, Cyclone answered. Me no see me no fool. Course not, you dang blind old Injun. Looks like I'm the biggest fool of all, Cyclone said, dejected and defeated. Wait a minute, Manuel put in. I think maybe you all think Manuel the fool. Maybe this is big trick to make Manuel think you know got money. Maybe you hide the real money someplace. Maybe you want Manuel to believe Senor Gunderson cheat you, just so Manuel go away and you get to keep your money. I wish that was the case, Manuel. But you know Gunderson. Don't you believe he'd pull a deal like this? Just to cheat us. See, Manuel said. Gunderson muy mal hombre. He would do such a dirty trick. A hint of a smile crossed Cyclone's lips. Still, senor, I think you would also try to fool Manuel. I still think you have the money. Then where is it? Cyclone retorted. Yeah, where is it? Rapp echoed, stepping forward and joining into the discussion that was just about to bubble over into a heated contest. Cyclone put the flat of his old hand on Rapp's broad chest and pushed him back. Shut up, Rapp, Cy ordered. Then to Manuel, look around, see if you find it. Manuel nodded to the men standing. 4 of them moved off into the rocks where the wildcats had taken refuge. In a few moments, they came back, shaking their heads. They had found nothing. Manuel pointed out 4 riders in his group and said, "Go catch up their horses. Perhaps the money is on one of them." They moved out quickly on through the canyon. You, and you, Manuel said to 3 more riders. "Go back down the trail. Make sure they didn't throw it off someplace, hoping to come back for it later." The riders turned their mounts, brushing up against the other riders in the tight queue. A few minutes later, the other riders returned with all 5 of the gang's horses. Again, the answer was, no money found. Cyclone glanced to Kitty, then to Rap, Chief, and Jeremy. His face drained its color, and he tried to hide the emotion he was feeling just now. When the others got back, the verdict was the same. No money had been tossed along the trail. Manuel grimaced and shook his big shaggy head and sombrero. He turned to Cyclone and said, with big disappointment in his tone, "I am sorry, mi amigo. I guess I was wrong. I think Mr. Gunderson did sap you after all." "When I get my hands on that weasel," Cyclone was fuming. "You will not, senor," Manuel interrupted him. "It is I who shall get the weasel, as you say, and the money." He grinned broadly. "You go on your way, and we shall remain amigos." "Sure," Cyclone said reluctantly. "Amigos? Then I shall be on my way too, Senor Cyclone." He pushed out his hand to shake Cyclone's. Cyclone hesitated, thought for a moment, then pulled his hand back. "If it's all right with you, Manuel, we'll just be amigos without the handshake. It's not that I don't trust you, but I'm mighty fond of my fingers, and I'm not sure I'd get them all back." Manuel grinned again, then broke out in a boisterous laugh. He mounted up, and he and his men rode off, back the way they had come. As they all watched the bandits ride off, Cyclone turned to the others and blustered, "Now where the hell did that money go?" Cyclone was still sulking, slouching low in the saddle and grumbling to himself beneath his breath by the time they had traversed the length of the canyon and had emerged on the other side. Kitty was riding beside him. Rap, Chief, and Jeremy were riding behind them. Kitty had remained silent during the journey, letting Cyclone stew in his own anger. She held back a trace of amusement and finally broke the silence. It was time to get her grandpa talking again. "Don't worry about it, Grandpa," she said. "Everything is going to be all right. You'll see." "All right," Cyclone groaned. "Without the money, how's everything going to be all right? You forgetting what you was going to use that money for?" "Of course not," Kitty said. "Your old grandpa let you down, girl. I thought I was so darn smart with that phony money and saddlebag. It was a big mistake setting our horses free with the real money still on my horse. I sure wish I knowed what happened to it." "What do you think happened to it? You think Manuel's men found it on my horse and kept it quiet from Manuel?" "No," Kitty said emphatically. "Now, if you'll just sit up straight in the saddle and look off up the trail, you'll see that money coming back to us." Cyclone startled. His feet pushed hard into the stirrup, and he pulled back sharply on the reins. He rubbed his eyes as if that would help him see better. Then he turned to Kitty, his face flushed with anger. Kitty didn't bother to look at him. She was gazing off into the distance. A rider was coming toward them, his horse at a trot. The rider was all in black hat, and a black broadcloth suit. He was riding a tall black stallion. The rider sat ramrod tall in the saddle, and as he approached, a wisp of a memory tugged at Kitty's heart. She remembered another tall man riding this same black stallion. "Hiya, Cyclone." "Hiya, Kitty," the rider greeted them as he rode up to them, swiveled the big black around so he could ride on with them. He pulled up alongside of Cyclone. Cyclone tried not to turn and look at the rider. He was a tall man. He had raven black hair that peeked out from under his flat-crowned, broad-brimmed hat. It couldn't rightly be called a range hat because it was immaculately clean and curved slightly. He wore an expensive vest, white shirt, and string tie. Much too fancy for a range man. He leaned forward in the saddle and peered around Cyclone at Kitty on the far side. "I see he still likes me," Dandy Jim Butler said jovially. "I'll tell you when I like you," Cyclone growled, looking up under the corner of his hat brim and casting a cursive look at the fancy-dressed gambler beside him. "This should cheer you up a little. Maybe buy myself a little good standing with you." He lifted saddlebags that had been draped across his horse's neck and handed them to Cyclone. Cyclone snatched the leather pouches and dropped them across the neck of his chestnut mare. "Might have known," he grumbled low, as if to nobody, but he really meant it for Kitty. "You trusted that slick-tongued dandy with my money. You got it back, didn't you?" Kitty smiled. She couldn't help but be amused. "Just couldn't trust your granddad to come through with the money, could you?" "Of course I did. I just thought it was a little insurance to have Jim get the bags from your horse while it was running loose, just in case those bandits wanted to take a look, which they did. Now be a good boy and thank Jim for helping us out." "I ain't no good boy and you ain't my ma," Cyclone fumed. Kitty gave him a mischievous, cross-eyed look. He stared hard back at her and pursed his lips. Then, before saying anything, his lips spread apart and he laughed at her. He could never be mad at Grandpa's girl. He gave a quick glance to the left and said, "Thanks, Jim." He jerked his head back and stared straight along the trail ahead of him. Chapter 2. "I feel like a darned fool in this thing," Cyclone complained. His voice had risen to a whine in his protests. "It'll only take a few seconds, Cy," Dandy Jim Butler said, as he buttoned the stiff white collar to the neckline of Cyclone's new white shirt. The shirt hung loose on him and draped nicely over his protruding middle. He was standing in front of the full-length mirror in Sir Gillian's men's wear store. The home of fine men's wear for the distinguished man, it had said on the storefront window just below the name of Sir Gillian's. Cy craned his neck higher as Jim finished fastening the collar to the shirt. Cyclone started to breathe with relief, but then as Jim pulled the two ends of the collar together to fasten it against the old man's large neck, Cyclone took another deep breath and held it in. "There," Jim said as he adjusted the collar, released it, and stood back to admire his handiwork. "You can breathe now, Cy," he said. "Take a look at yourself in the mirror." Cyclone breathed out in relief. The collar felt tight around his throat. He inserted the index finger of his right hand behind the edge of the collar and ran it back and forth, stretching his neck higher and loosening it a bit. He lowered his head and gazed into the mirror. What he saw was quite striking, and he almost smiled in satisfaction. But after all his complaints and caterwauling, he dared not let on his approval. Before him now, he saw a quite different-looking man. Gone was the long trail duster, the checkered bandana he always wore. The old worn-out denim breeches and worn leather boots with run-down heels were gone. In their place, Cy Carlin now sported neat black trousers with narrow gray pinstripes, blended just enough to give a look of quality. Matching suspenders held the trousers in place just a little below his middle, and went well with the new white shirt. He stood in stocking feet with new socks. They were of a silky nylon fabric and felt very smooth. They were ankle-high beneath his neatly pressed and sharply creased trousers. He now looked like a new man, or rather, the man he used to be in his youth. "Now all you need is a nice vest, string tie, and some shoes," Jim said, watching Cyclone in the full-length mirror. Cyclone was pleased with the look. He just didn't want anyone to know it. Jim smiled knowingly to himself as he handed Cy a matching pinstripe vest. "Here, try this on," he said. Cy took it, held it up in front of him, noticing the fine workmanship of the vest and feeling the smoothness of the material. He put it on without a comment. He buttoned it and gazed at himself in the mirror. He stood up straighter, pushing himself taller in his stocking feet. He nodded approvingly to himself. Danged if he didn't look spiffy, he thought to himself. Arapaho, Chief, and Jeremy were in the changing rooms, trying on clothes. Chief and Jeremy didn't need any help. They were both eager to get into fine new clothes. It had been a long time since Chief had worn anything but his trail duster, flowered shirt, and the flat-brimmed hat with 3 feathers in the hatband. With new clothes, he could once again be Henry Tolliver instead of that fake Indian he portrayed. Arapaho had been a different situation. Although he was excited like a child to be getting new clothes, he had no idea how to go about picking them out. He had quickly gone for mismatched articles of clothing that were outlandishly on the loud side. Dandy Jim picked out what he thought would be suitable for Rap. Rap was happy with the choices. Actually, he would have been happy with anything. He had never had store-bought clothes in his life. He hurried into the trousers and shirt and jumped out of the dressing room like a child ready to display himself for Mommy and Daddy to see. By mid-afternoon, the entire male members of the Wildcat gang, now dressed in fine suits, shiny new shoes and top hats, had been transformed, at least outwardly to the world, into debonair city gentlemen. Jim was well satisfied with his handiwork and was still admiring the transformation when Kitty Carlin came breezing into the store. She held several packages under her arms and in her hands. She had been shopping for the first time in what seemed like ages ago. Jim smiled approvingly, and Sigh's, Henry's, and Rap's jaws dropped at the sight of Kitty wearing a stunning, pale yellow gown with lace at the hem and around the bodice. On seeing their reaction, she set her packages down on the floor and spun around on her heel to show the gown off. Her recent, neatly coiffed hair flew about her with the motion. It draped, framing her face as she came to a standing halt. "You like?" Kitty smiled coyly. "Yes, I like," Dandy Jim said admiringly. "I like very much." "She was talking to us," Cyclone growled at Jim. "Don't matter what you like. And I know what you're liking, so put them eyes back in your head where they belong." "Well, I like it too, Cy. And my eyes are in my head. Where else would they be?" Rap commented. Cyclone groaned. After their altercation with Manuel and his bandits down in New Mexico, Kitty and the others headed for Denver to catch the eastbound train to Kansas City. From there, they would take a riverboat on the Missouri River to St. Louis. Kitty's mother had been ailing for quite some time. After the death of Kitty's father, which Kitty was sure that the dangerously mean banker, Simon Price, had caused, Kitty had sent her mother off to a nursing home in St. Louis, Missouri. She had sent the family's longtime friend, Paco, with her to watch over her and see that she got the best of care. Kitty had then begun her vendetta against Simon Price, Fortune City's leading citizen, banker, judge, mayor, and everything else of power in the community. The money she stole from him would go to support her mother. Kitty had received word from Paco that her mother had taken a turn for the worse and would need to be transported to a better facility. She now wanted to go to St. Louis to visit her mother and see that she got the care she needed. Kitty and the others had acquired $40,000 in silver, but because they were wanted outlaws, the only means of obtaining cash was to fence it off for half its value. They had traded with a nefarious character along the New Mexico border named Snake Gunderson for half of the silver's value. Gunderson was a big, burly man with a full black beard and a matching black eye patch over his left eye. He was a shifty man and couldn't be trusted, so Cyclone had arranged to make the trade with him in a desolate arroyo near the edge of the desert. Cyclone had demanded that the exchange would be made, one-on-one, man to man. Cyclone would deliver the wagon of silver to Gunderson. He would leave the wagon and team with Gunderson, and he would receive the money in Gunderson's saddlebags, climb on his chestnut mare that he had brought along, and ride off. The sight of anyone else in the area would queer the whole deal. Manuel and Gunderson had always been thick as thieves, which they were. They would work together and also against each other if the price was right. Wherever one of them was, the other could surely be found, not far away. Cyclone knew better than to trust anyone, and he was sure that neither Gunderson nor Manuel would let him get far with the money. So he had already made up bundles to look like cash with bills on the outsides and plain paper inside. When he once again caught up with Kitty and the rest, he switched the contents of the saddlebags. He had anticipated Manuel's attempt to steal the money and had anticipated just how and when the Mexican bandit would hit them and steer them into the canyon and a waiting trap. Cyclone might have outsmarted himself if it had not been for Kitty getting help from Dandy Jim Butler, which Cyclone was sure would turn out to be a mistake that they would all regret later on. Now with the money in hand, the Wildcats had ridden into Denver. They were a dusty lot as they rode into town. Actually, it was not a town at all, but a city, a thriving metropolis. The streets were paved with cobble, and their horses' hooves clanked loudly against the stone as they trod along. There were people hustling and bustling everywhere. More people than any of them had ever seen in one place. That is, everyone except Dandy Jim Butler, who had been in Denver before, as well as other large cities, such as St. Louis and New Orleans. "You all stand out like sore thumbs," Dandy Jim had said as they rode side by side down a side street. Jim had been trying to take them on a route avoiding the main centers of town. "In those get-ups and the guns you're wearing, you'll be noticed." They all looked about them as they rode. They noticed people were staring at them. They also noticed that everyone was well dressed. Men wore suits and top hats. Women wore nice gowns and hats. "Somebody might even recognize you," Jim had continued. They noticed a uniformed policeman standing on a corner. His eyes drifted toward the riders. A chugging vehicle whipped around the corner up ahead and turned toward the riders. It whizzed by them at a top speed of 15 miles per hour. The horses shrieked with fright and stamped about in a frenzy. The riders had to fight at the reins to pull them under control. "What the blazes was that thing?" Arapaho exclaimed. "Looked like a runaway wagon without any horses." They were all now sitting their horses at a standstill in the middle of the street. Dandy Jim laughed. "That's the future, Rap," he said. "That's what's called an automobile." "That's too big of a word for me," Rap moaned. "I'll just call it a tin horse." "Call it what you want, Rap, but they are here to stay, and you'll be seeing a lot more of them if you're in the cities long. I'm sure you'll see them in Kansas City and St. Louis, too." Just then, another automobile appeared from down the street. They all held their horses tight to prevent them from floundering out of control again. The horses snorted and shuffled about, wide-eyed, as the vehicle passed them by. "Best we get these horses stabled," Jim said. "And get you all some decent clothes. You'll blend in better. Besides, you're all going to need new clothes for St. Louis anyways." Kitty perked up at the suggestion. The thought of new clothes appealed to her, and with $20,000 in her poke, she knew they could well afford them. Chapter 3. "I ain't never ridden on a train before," Rap Brown said excitedly. He was sitting next to the window with his seat facing backward. Chief Henry was sitting next to him on the aisle. "Septin to rob one," he finished. He was excited like a little boy. "Shh, keep it quiet, you danged fool," Cyclone whispered loudly. "You want somebody to arrest us?" "Why?" Rap asked blankly. "We ain't doing nothing." "Just don't say nothing about robbing trains or nothing." "Nothing? Nothing?" Cyclone repeated. "Just keep your yap shut. We don't want people around us thinking we're not proper dignified folk." "We ain't?" Rap asked. "No, Paleface," Chief answered him. "No speak 'em no more. Hey, go easy on that engine stuff, Henry. You can blow it for us, too." "Don't worry, Cy. Just funning." Cyclone was sitting in the opposite seat, facing forward and directly in front of Rap. Kitty sat next to her grandpa, and Jeremy sat next to the aisle. Their suitcases were stowed away on the overhead rack. Kitty kept her round hat box on her lap. With conversation now kept to a minimum, to the world outside, they all looked like properly dignified citizens, routinely riding the rails with other proper dignified citizens. The men were decked out in their new suits, and Kitty was wearing a blue gingham gown and new hat that settled neatly and tipped forward at an angle atop her auburn locks. Dandy Jim had stayed on in Denver, as he said he had business to attend to there. As the other passengers boarded and took their seats, Cyclone checked out each and every one of them, expecting to find a lawman among them. "I feel naked sitting here with no shooting irons," Cyclone whispered to Kitty. Kitty squeezed his big hand and smiled. "Don't worry about it, Grandpa," she said. "It's about time you got used to living like other people." "You're forgetting," he said. "We ain't other people. We's outlaws. Every time we turn around, there's likely to be a lawman behind us." "Oh, Grandpa, you're just being paranoid," Kitty said reassuringly. "Well, just the same, just 'cause I'm para, whatever you said, don't mean they ain't out to get us." "You're being silly, Grandpa. Just relax and enjoy the ride," Kitty said. The train had already started to move ahead. At first, it had been a jolt as the wheels started to grip the rails. Then the movement started out slow. The platform and station, seen through the side window of the car, seemed to move backward away from them. "Silly, am I?" Cyclone's whisper had risen a notch louder. "You see that tall man 3 rows up ahead? Black suit and bowler hat?" Kitty had just barely nodded acknowledgement as Cyclone continued. "He's a Pinkerton detective, if I've ever seen one afore." "Hey, Cy," Rap said. "I'm not feeling too good. Everything going backwards is making my stomach turn. Can I trade places with one of you guys?" "I gotta keep an eye on that Pinkerton man," Cy said with irritation. "Pinkerton man?" Rap exclaimed aloud. He turned his body and head to look behind him. "Shh, you idiot, and don't look at him." "Huh," Rap was bewildered. "Here, I'll trade places with you, Rap," Kitty said, starting to slide out of her seat. "Thank you, sweetie," Rap said. They swapped places, Rap wriggling his big body in between Cyclone and Jeremy. Jeremy slid sideways and ended up on the edge of the seat, about to fall out into the aisle. "This just isn't going to work," Jeremy grumbled. "There's some empty seats up ahead. I'm going to go find me one." He stood up into the aisle, his feet grasping for a hold on the moving floor. "I saw you looking at that girl at the other end of the car," Kitty said. "Looks like she's traveling alone." "Not for long," Jeremy said with a grin, and ambled on up the aisle. The man in the black suit and bowler hat glanced up at Jeremy as he passed by. His big bushy black mustache twitched beneath his bulbous nose. "See what I told you," Cyclone whispered. "He's a Pinkerton man, all right. Just look at how he's watching Jeremy." Kitty turned her head slowly, trying not to be noticed. She saw the man in black return his eyes to his newspaper as Jeremy passed by. Kitty smiled knowingly to herself. The man had merely been distracted by someone in the aisle. Kitty turned back, smiled at Cyclone, and then turned her attention to the scenery passing by as the train now sped at full speed along the rails. "Excuse me, miss," Jeremy said in his most unintimidating voice and smiling shyly. "Would you mind if I sit here with you? It's a bit cramped sitting back there with my companions." His hat was off and in his hands. The girl was young, about Jeremy's age, perhaps a little younger. Jeremy was wondering why a girl so young would be traveling by herself. She had curly blonde hair, and her pear-shaped face was clear with an unblemished complexion. She had high cheekbones, and cheeks were rosy. She gazed up at the boyish face with a friendly smile. She flustered at first, as if taken by surprise. Then she smiled slightly, nodded, and without a word, gathered her skirts closer to her as she slid closer to the window, as if there was need to make more room. Jeremy slid into the seat, close to the aisle, and leaving seat space between them, not wanting to appear like he was encroaching on her space. The two rode on in silence for several miles. Occasionally, the girl would turn her head slightly and give him a quick up-from-under glance, then turn quickly back to gaze out the window before he could catch her looking. Jeremy tried to appear like he was staring ahead, but occasionally he would sneak a peek out of the corner of his eye. The miles sped away with the monotonous drone of the engine and wheels. Finally, at one point, both Jeremy and the girl caught each other catching a glimpse of each other. Their eyes met, and they smiled at each other. They both began to giggle. The ice had finally broken, and they began to talk. "How are you feeling now, Rap?" Kitty asked. He had been leaning back in the seat, his eyes closed, but now he had sat up straight and was looking around. Cy was still eyeing the man in black. It seemed like the train was losing speed. "I'm feeling a lot better now," Rap said. "I should have took my medicine before we started." He patted his sides under his coat and pulled out a flask. He unscrewed it and chuck-a-lugged several swallows. "Ah, best medicine in the world," he said, as he restoppered it and put it away under his coat. "Medicine, my foot," Cyclone growled. "Someday that rot gut's gonna kill you." "I'll die a happy man." Rap grinned. Just then, a whoosh of air rushed into the car as the back door burst open. At the same time, the man in black dropped his newspaper, jumped to his feet, standing in the aisle with a .38 police pistol in his hand. "Don't anybody move!" he shouted as he brandished the weapon back and forth to threaten passengers up and down the aisle. Two men had stepped through the car's rear door. They were rough-looking men, and they had guns in their hands. The bigger one of the two shouted, "This is a holdup." Cyclone, Rap, and Henry all reached to their thighs, only to be reminded they weren't carrying weapons. The train jerked to a halt. Jeremy, up front, had jumped up from his seat, wobbling on unsteady feet as the train lurched to a stop. He was turning toward the back when the car's door at the other end behind him burst open. Two more gunmen were in the entrance. Jeremy froze in place, his eyes roaming from the hold-up men to Cyclone and the others. One of the newcomers reached out and grasped Jeremy by the collar, jerking him upright in the middle of the aisle, spinning him around and holding him in place with one arm while he pushed the muzzle of a pistol into the side of Jeremy's neck. His partner, behind him, warned, "You were told not to move." The big man in black spoke up. "That young man almost got his head blowed off. If you don't all cooperate with us, you'll see what will happen to you as his brains splatter all over." He laughed. Jeremy was frozen in place. His eyes darted back and forth, taking in the outlaws at the other end of the car. He glanced at his friends, wanting to see if they were going to do anything. But they weren't moving. Their eyes were fixed on the robbers. With a sudden jerk, Jeremy was pitched into an empty seat, and the robbers went about their business with the passengers. "That guy weren't no Pinkerton man, Cy," Rap whispered. "Shut up, I knowed it all the time." Kitty and Henry gave him a knowing look. "What do we do now?" Chief asked. "Nothing. Just nothing," Cy fumed. Then, leaning close to Kitty, he said, "Where'd you put the money?" "It's in the hat box," Kitty answered quickly in a low whisper. They had no sooner spoken when the two robbers behind them pushed their way in close. They had already relieved the passengers behind the Wildcats of their valuables. "What are you people whispering about? Did I hear you say something about money?" It was the larger of the two outlaws. His voice was gruff and menacing. The other bandits were attending to the rest of the car, gathering their loot in large canvas bags. "I was saying," Cyclone answered glibly, "it's a good thing we got no money." His words slowed as they came out, and realization set in that Cyclone knew this bandit. His name was Bart Drago, wanted for every crime in the books. Cyclone had run into him once in Juarez. Cy quickly turned his head away, avoiding eye contact with the robber. "We'll just see about that," Drago answered. Start digging deep and empty what you got. He held the bag close, its opening gaping. He no sooner gave the order when he came up with a start. "Hey, wait a minute," he exclaimed, reaching across and grasping Cyclone by the point of his chin and jerking Cy's head so he could peer into the old man's face. Drago studied it a moment, then grinned. "It is you, isn't it?" he said. "You're the Cyclone kid." "Shh," Cyclone protested. "Don't say it so loud." Other passengers were already taking notice. "What are you doing here and all duded up like that?" Drago asked. "What do you think I'm doing?" Cyclone came back. "I was waiting to do what you're doing right now." Cy was thinking fast. "What's taking you so long?" The man in black blustered. "We haven't got all day. Get what they got and let's finish this up." "Let you go this time," Drago said. Then, turning to Kitty, not knowing she was with Cyclone, he pushed the canvas bag toward Kitty. "What about you, little lady?" Drago said. "What have you got?" "This," Kitty shouted as she pulled her hand out from under the hat box. There was a 2-barreled Derringer in her hand. It popped and flames spit out. Drago fell backward, grasping at the gaping wound in his shoulder, his pistol and bag dropping to the floor. Powder smoke drifted in the air. Before the other bandits could react, Kitty stood and fired again. The man in black had just turned and brought his pistol up to bear on her, as Kitty's second bullet took him in the arm. He dropped his pistol. By now, the other bandits had reacted, all turning to return fire. Kitty's Derringer was now empty. Several shots rang out. The car filled with gun smoke, and the 3 remaining bandits went down, wounded badly. The girl Jeremy had been sitting with stood in the middle of the aisle, feet planted firmly on the floor, legs spread apart in a shooting stance. A smoking pistol was held in firmly in both hands. "Everything's all right now, people," she announced over the wisping vapors of smoke. "I'm a Pinkerton Railroad detective. Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid. And the train robbers." The train slowed to a crawl as it negotiated the steep incline through Coyote Pass. Massive cliff walls flanked the lumbering locomotive on both sides. The pass was just narrow enough for the train to pass through. It was an ideal spot for robbers to attack the train. Black Bart and his men waited patiently from their perches on each cliffside for the noonday express to enter the pass. They watched as it approached and lumbered its way slowly up the track. As the engine passed by, 2 of Black Bart's men dropped into the locomotive cab with guns in hand. They quickly subdued the engineer and firemen. They took over controls and let the train exit the pass, where they could bring the engine and all the cars to a halt on a flat plain. As the big smoke steamer rolled to a halt, Black Bart and 4 more men rode up to the express car, pulling their mounts to a halt, forming a semicircle in front of it. "Open up in there," Black Bart shouted toward the sliding door of the express car. "We got dynamite out here. If you don't open up, we'll blow you out of there." "Just a minute," a nervous-sounding voice answered. "I won't fight you. I'll let you in. Please don't hurt me." "Ha ha," Black Bart laughed. The big door slid open, and seated on 5 horses, side by side, was Wildcat Kitty, the Cyclone Kid, and the Wildcat Gang, the most feared gang in the West. Black Bart stopped laughing, and his dirty black stubbled face paled. "Wildcats," he yelled, spinning his mount around to ride away. His companions followed after. The gallant horses of the Wildcat Gang leaped from the express car floor, hind legs thrust out behind them like flying squirrels. They landed safely on the ground, and the Wildcats rode off in pursuit of Black Bart and his gang. The 2 men who had subdued the engineer and stopped the train leaped from the locomotive rails and started to run. They didn't get far, for Chief Two Owls ran them down, shoving them both to the ground and holding them at bay with his Winchester. Wildcat Kitty, Arapaho Brown, and Jeremy Carlin each rode a man down and lassoed him. The Cyclone Kid caught up with Black Bart and spilled him from his saddle. In only a matter of minutes, it was all over. The Wildcat gang rode away, leaving the outlaws trussed up tight with rope, awaiting the arrival of the law. Their work here was done, and new adventures awaited Wildcat Kitty, the Cyclone Kid, Arapaho Brown, Chief Two Owls, and Jeremy Carlin. "Wow, this one was sure exciting," little Kathy said to her brother, Jimmy. She closed the dime novel and gazed at the illustrated cover. This was one of the dime novels that had been written about the Cyclone Kid in his older age, with the addition of Wildcat Kitty and the Wildcat Gang. This one was also written by Chris Coulter. "Yeah," Jimmy said, "but I don't understand why they helped the law. I thought the Wildcat Gang was outlaws." Jimmy was 12 years old, just 2 years older than Kathy. They often played in the upper floor of the barn on a rainy day, but today was not a rainy day. It was just a drab day, and there were only a few remaining days of summer vacation before school started again. It was approaching the fall of 1938. The children had been playing in the barn several weeks ago when their curiosity got the best of them, and they went rummaging through their grandpa's trunk. Here they found the collection of dime novels about the Cyclone Kid. They were enthralled by these exciting adventures, and they had become addicted to sneaking up into this part of the barn that was used only for storage and spending the day with the thrilling tales. They knew they were not to be rummaging through Grandpa's things, but they just couldn't seem to help themselves. "Well, they are not really outlaws," Kathy answered her brother. They're just misunderstood. They really ride for justice." "I know," Jimmy said. "I just don't understand." Just then the signal for dinner time came. The blowing of the horn on the 1934 Packard sitting in the driveway. "We'd better put this back in the trunk," Kathy said. "If Grandpa ever caught us going through his things, I don't think he would understand." Chapter 4. "One thing has been bothering me, girl," Cyclone started to say. "Here it comes," Kitty thought to herself. She knew her grandfather had been dying to ask it ever since they slipped off the train when it stopped for water at Junction Station. The train robbers had been tended to and incarcerated in the train's freight car. The Wildcats knew that when the train would finally arrive in Kansas City, the local authorities would be waiting to come aboard and take custody of the outlaws. Even if the authorities would only be interested in them as witnesses, they couldn't take the chance that they might be recognized as wanted themselves. It had been a long, hot, grueling trek from the station at Junction Flats to Century City, a good 3/4 of a mile away. The shiny new shoes the men were wearing were thickly covered with dust, and perspiration had started to seep into the new suits. The men carried the luggage, one bag for each of them. Rapp carried 3, one for himself and 2 for Kitty. He didn't know why Kitty needed more than the rest of them, but he didn't really care. He would do anything for Kitty. He didn't seem to wonder why one of the others couldn't help. They had been in Century City for almost 2 hours now. Kitty had purchased tickets for them all, and they were waiting for the next stagecoach out of town. They were all tired, and their feet still hurt from the long hike in new store-bought shoes that were obviously made more for fashion than comfort of walking cross-country. Conversation had dwindled down to none at all while they waited. Cyclone had been stewing about something the whole time. Finally, he brought it up. "Girl, I want to know, just where did you get that derringer that you pulled on them gents?" He was angry because he already knew the answer. "From Jim, of course, Grandpa," she said flippantly. "From Jim? I knowed it all the time. You got it from that dandy." "Then why did you ask, Grandpa?" I just wanted to hear you say it." "No, doggone it, I didn't want to hear that." "Well, make up your mind, Grandpa. Jim thought I might need it to protect the money. He was right, wasn't he?" "Sure he was," Cyclone blubbered. "That's what makes me so derned mad. It's Jim this and Jim that. He's the one who keeps saving us our money. Getting so you won't need your old grandpa no more." "Oh, Grandpa," Kitty said, taking his big hand in hers and squeezing it, "I'll always need you, and you know it." "Then how come you didn't let me have a gun instead of packing them away?" "Because you would have brought it out blazing at the first hint of any trouble." "You're darn tootin' I would," Cyclone affirmed. "See what I mean?" Kitty said. "You would have imagined trouble, and we would have been in the middle of some fracas we didn't need to be in." "Imagine? I don't imagine anything. You thought that man on the train was a Pinkerton detective. If you had a gun, you would have been pulling it out." "Maybe he wasn't a Pinkerton man, but he was a dad-burned outlaw." "Never mind, Grandpa. You're still the man around here. I still need you, so quit your pouting and get ready. Here comes the stage now." From down the street, the big Studebaker coach with 3 teams of horses thundered into town. Stage drivers always liked to whip up the teams for that last short distance as they came into town. It was a show to give the impression of speedy transportation. Seldom, if ever, did they travel that fast on the main routes. Kitty, Cyclone, and the others gathered their things and were getting ready as the 6 up horses whipped past them, slowing to a halt, bringing the coach up close in front of them. A dust cloud lingered over them and the coach as the driver brought the entire entourage to a halt. The driver secured the brake, tied off the reins, and hopped down from the boot. He was a spindly man with narrow shoulders and a thick beard covering his cheeks. "Stand back, everybody," he ordered as he attended to the stagecoach door to let passengers out. There were 4 passengers, 2 men and 2 women. There were expressions of annoyance as they had to step down and squeeze between the coach and waiting wildcats. They hurried away toward the express office door. An attendant had come out and climbed up onto the stage and started handing luggage down to the driver. There had been no shotgun guard on this run. "I don't know about this, Kitty," Cyclone said. "I don't like the idea of riding on a stagecoach. It ain't safe." "Of course it is, Grandpa," Kitty said. "Oh, I don't think so," Cyclone said. "You never know when some owl hoots might come along and try to stick it up." "Oh, Grandpa, who's going to hold us up?" "We might," Arapaho put in. "We hold up stages all the time." "You dumb idiot," Cyclone blustered. "We can't hold ourselves up." "We can't." "No, we can't." "Well then," Rap beamed with glee, "we got nothing to worry about." "Me worry about you, crazy paleface," Chief said. It was cramped inside the stage. Fortunately, the Wildcats were the only passengers. Even though the seats were made to accommodate 3 passengers each, they did not comfortably seat 3 big men, as was the case of Cyclone, Arapaho, and Chief. Kitty and Jeremy were smaller, so they sat in the rear seat with Cyclone. Across the aisle facing them, Rap and Chief sat riding backward. The driver and the attendant were still tying down luggage on the roof of the coach. Kitty had still kept her hat box with her, on her lap. "Ah, Cy," Rap said. "You know I can't ride backward." "Oh, hell," Cyclone groaned. He pushed himself up, bent over and head bumping the top of the coach. Rap did the same, and the 2 seemed to do a dance, falling all over and around each other, and finally falling into the appropriate seat. Everyone else was squishing from side to side, making room to accommodate the transfer. They had just settled themselves when the stage door opened wide. A man stood there looking into the coach. His upper torso and head filled the opening. He was a big man, about 50. He had a drooping salt and pepper mustache. His eyes were dark and stern. A sheriff's star was pinned to the tan leather vest he wore. The Wildcats froze in silence. Their eyes flitted back and forth to each other and to the lawman. "Sorry to bother you folks," the lawman said flatly. His voice was deep and raspy. He didn't sound apologetic. "I'm Sheriff Tom Vestry." Kitty and the others breathed a sigh of relief. At least his lawman was not after them. Yet, but their apprehension prevailed. They just hoped that it didn't show. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you slide together and make room for an extra passenger. He grabbed the side rail next to the coach door and hefted his large frame up into the coach. He slid into the space next to Chief and Cyclone, wriggling his big butt to and fro, squeezing Chief up against Cy and pinching him up against the outside wall of the coach. Cyclone hunched his shoulders and held his arms straight down, clasping his hands together between his knees. "Dad-burned law dog," he muttered to himself. "Did you say something, sir?" the sheriff asked. No, Cyclone said defensively. "Just saying, just you make yourself comfortable." He flashed a fake smile, then turned away to grimace toward the window. "Are you just traveling, Sheriff?" Kitty asked, keeping her voice demure. "Or," she continued hesitantly, "are you expecting trouble?" The lawman glared at her with steely eyes. Suddenly, the sound of a bullwhip snapped. The stage lurched forward as the driver could be heard shouting, "Hia!" The coach rattled and bounced on the leathers as it rumbled off into the street. Dust spewed up from the wheels and drifted in through the windows. "Nothing for you to worry about," the sheriff said, as they all bounced against each other while trying to settle down in their seats. "I didn't see a shotgun rider," Jeremy said, "so I assume there's nothing of value being shipped." The coach was already out of town by now, and the driver slowed the teams down to a mere trot. "Don't be alarmed if I tell you we're carrying $100,000 on this run." Cyclone, squashed as he was, could have fallen out of his seat. He half choked and coughed. "100,000, he gasped to himself. The sheriff leaned forward to look around Chief at Cyclone. "You said something, sir? The noise of the coach and horses is just too loud." The lawman's attention lingered a little longer than Cyclone was comfortable with. He stared directly into Cyclone's face. There was a hint of recognition in Vestry's dark eyes, but he again sat back in his seat as if he had determined that he was probably mistaken. "Nothing," Cyclone gasped, stifling his cough. He glanced at Kitty. She didn't seem amused. She just nodded back and forth, signaling him to remain calm. "There's no guard because we didn't want to attract attention," the sheriff continued in response to Jeremy's comment. "We thought it would be safer if I just rode along inside. If there's an outlaw anywhere close by, I'll know it. That's what I'm afraid of," Cyclone thought to himself. He squeezed farther down in his seat. "I can smell an outlaw a mile away," the lawman continued to boast. Rapp, who had remained quiet ever since the arrival of the big sheriff, leaned close to Kitty and whispered, "You think I smell, Kit?" "Course not," she whispered back. "Just relax and keep quiet." They had seen the lawman watching them as they spoke, but Kitty was sure he couldn't have heard them. The stage rolled on for miles. The cramped quarters, the jouncing coach, and dust pouring in through the windows all made the trip seem long and endless. The passengers rode in silence. Cyclone pretended to go to sleep. Across the aisle, Rapp was asleep. Kitty stayed alert and occasionally glanced across the way at Chief and the lawman. She would smile slightly whenever the sheriff caught her looking at him. Then she would look away out the window. The dust had died down. The desert had passed away behind them. Trees and green grass was now more prevalent as scenery. They had traveled for about 2 hours when the stage started to slow down. Cyclone sat up more erect, opening his eyes and readying himself for trouble. Arapaho jerked suddenly awake. His hat had slid down over his brow. He sat up straight and adjusted the hat. What?" he muttered. "Are we there yet?" "Driver's just stopping to rest the horses and give them a drink," Sheriff Vestry said flatly. Whoa, they could hear the driver calling to his teams. The stage rolled to a halt. There was an opening in the roof of the stage just under the driver's seat so he could communicate with his passengers. They all could see him wrapping reins around the brake pole. "Giving the horses a breather," the driver called down. "You folks might want to get out and stretch or whatever." He winked at Kitty. She quickly looked away. Vestry was quick to open the door on his side and shoved his big frame out, stepping down into the gravel road. He turned back toward the stage, urging the others to step out. By the time they all exited the coach, the driver had already turned his attention to the water barrel stored at the rear of the vehicle. He had opened it and was dipping a wooden bucket into the water. Rap was stretching, grunting and arching his back as if trying to get the kinks out. Cyclone, ever on guard, made no extraneous moves whatsoever. Kitty was gathering the folds of his dress, shaking the wrinkles out of them. The driver had just crossed in front of them on the way to his horses with a full water bucket in each hand when Sheriff Tom Vestry pulled his gun. "Don't anybody move," he ordered. "Gold dang it," Cyclone muttered. So, the sheriff had recognized them all along. The driver stopped dead in his tracks, set down the water buckets, and turned around in surprise. "Now get your hands up," Vestry shouted. "I thought you told us not to move," Rap said, a bit confused. "That's right," the lawman answered. "Now I want you to get your hands up." Cyclone, Kitty, Chief, and Jeremy were glancing back and forth to each other and back to the lawman. Slowly they raised their hands as ordered. "Just do as the man said," Cyclone said to Rap. Rap looked to each of his companions, and seeing them with their hands up, he slowly raised his. "I just wish he'd make up his mind," Rap grumbled. "What gives here, Tom?" the driver asked in bewilderment. "Goes for you too, Amos," the lawman said. "Get your hands up too." At that moment, 3 horsemen rode out of the brush and brought their horses to a sliding halt in the roadbed next to them. "I said get them up," Vestry repeated. The driver set his buckets down and straightened up, his hands lifted slowly to just below shoulder level. "What going on, Tom?" he asked again. "This is a holdup," Vestry answered. There was a slight chuckle in his voice. "You mean the passengers tried to hold us up? Then how come you got a gun on me?" "You idiot," Vestry said. "I'm holding you all up." The 3 riders had dismounted and had their guns out. But, Amos stammered, "you're the sheriff." "Of course I'm the sheriff, and this is a stick-up." You're not afraid I won't tell on you?" The driver's eyes were bulging wide with fear. He already knew the answer. "No, because you won't live to tell it," he answered. Then he shot poor Amos where he stood. Then, to the 3 men, "Get the loot from the boot, then see what our friendly travelers have for us." One man went quickly to the front of the stage and climbed up toward the boot. The other 2 turned their attention to the passengers. Kitty was still holding her hat box with the money in it. One bandit stepped up to her, while the other one went to Chief and started to pat him down. Well, little lady, let's see what you got." He tried to jerk the hat box out of her hand. She resisted, and he pulled harder. He yanked harder, and when she let go, he stumbled backward. His pistol barrel tipped skyward. The hat box broke open, and bundles of cash spilled out. Kitty cut loose with her derringer. She had held hidden under the folds of her skirt. The bandit took the pellet in the right shoulder. A small hole appeared, and blood streamed out. The bandit, frisking Henry, taken by surprise, wheeled about and Kitty shot him in the shoulder before he knew what was happening. Vestry, still standing over the fallen driver, twisted on his heel, taking in the situation in one swift glance. He brought his pistol up to bear on Kitty. Her little weapon, still trailing powder smoke, was empty. Her eyes met with Vestry's. There was an angry snarl on his face, and he squeezed the trigger. Kitty's eyes closed, and she heard the thundering roar of pistol fire. She felt nothing. Then she heard another shot and a thud. After a moment, she blinked her eyes open. Tom Vestry was lying in the dirt, clutching his right leg with his right hand. A crimson trickle oozed out between his fingers. His pistol lay in the dirt a foot away from him. Off to his left, the bandit who had climbed up to the boot lies still on his back. A big splotch of red stained the middle of his shirt. The Cyclone Kid was standing over the bandit lawman. His six-shooter was aimed directly at Vestry's head, only an inch away. "I know who you are now," Vestry growled between clenched teeth. "You're the Cyclone Kid." "If you say so," Cyclone muttered. "Then," he said, looking around at the others, "she must be the one they call Wildcat Kitty, and the others are the rest of your gang." "Good thing for us you didn't recognize us sooner," Cyclone chuckled. "Grandpa," Kitty shouted, "where did you get that gun?" "While you was busy buying our tickets, I took it from my suitcase and tucked it away under my belt out of sight, so's you wouldn't know about it. Good thing I did too. That little pea shooter your beau Jim give you was only going to get you killed. Looks like I did better for you this time than that dandy fella." "Oh, Grandpa," Kitty said, "I knew I couldn't get along without you. You're a darn tootin' gal." Chapter 5. "Wooey!" Arapaho Brown exclaimed as they all entered the dining room. "I ain't never seen nothing like this before. Imagine eating and riding at the same time, and I don't even have to ride backward or forward. I can even sleep in a real indoor bed while I ride. Man, this is really something." Some time ago, Rap had shared with Kitty about his unhappy childhood and how he had never had anything, not even a family. As she watched the delight dance in his eyes at the first glimpse of the least little things that most people took for granted, she felt so happy for him and sorry at the same time. He was just like a kid seeing the world in all its wonders for the very first time. The riverboat was a dazzling delight, the likes of which he could never have dreamed of. After the aborted stage holdup, not wanting to get involved with any other law, and having to explain what had happened, the Wildcats had left the wounded outlaws where they had attempted the robbery. They had loaded the driver's body on the roof of the coach. Jeremy was an accomplished driver and took over handling the teams. When they reached the outskirts of Hays City, Kansas, they abandoned the coach and hoped that it would be found with its shipment intact. The $100,000 falling into their laps was tempting. Even though they were known as outlaws, this was not the kind of money the Wildcats would take. They just were not that kind of outlaw. Having left the coach behind, the Wildcats had trudged on, once again on foot, through the city streets of Hays. Rap still carried 3 bags, while the other men only carried 1. He still didn't wonder why. Here they boarded another stage and continued on to Kansas City. Kansas City was another thriving metropolis with the modern world encroaching. Jeremy was excited to see the sights. Chief Henry and Kitty had been to cities before and pretty much took everything for granted. Cyclone was nervous and looking out for trouble on every street and corner. Rap was in awe of everything. And just as Dandy Jim Butler had predicted, there were those scary tin horses running every which way on all the streets. When they had reached the docks and first laid eyes on the Delta Queen riverboat, Rap was practically beside himself. "You mean to tell me that big thing stays on top of the water? You sure it won't just sink to the bottom of the river?" He was starting to be afraid. "No, it won't, Rap," Kitty said. "I promise." "I don't know, Kitty, but if you say so, all right, but I'll keep my eyes shut." Once aboard, Rap could not keep his eyes shut. Everything he saw was a wonder. The Delta Queen would leave Kansas City and travel along the Missouri River, transporting the Wildcats the rest of the way to St. Louis. When Rap saw the stateroom that he, Chief Henry, and Jeremy were going to share with real beds, he couldn't believe it, and he was thrilled. Cyclone and Kitty had the room adjoining. They had put their luggage away in their rooms and had gone up on deck to watch as the Delta Queen pulled out from the dock. The engine had revved to a whine. The big paddle wheel began to turn. The whistle blew as the craft began to float out from the dock. Rap felt the sudden tug and the movement beneath his feet. He gripped the rail in front of him and braced himself. Fear spread over his big, long face. Kitty gave him a reassuring smile and he began to relax. "Now, After traveling on the river for a half an hour, they had gone exploring everything the Delta Queen had to offer them. Rap was now comfortable with the trip and was marveling at everything he saw. They had passed by the dining room and looked into the passenger lounge. There was a bar at the far side of the lounge, and the room was filled with tables as well as gaming tables. A roulette wheel was positioned over one of the gaming tables, but was not in use at the moment. There were 2 tables with card games in progress. It was Cyclone who was surprised, and not surprised when his eyes drifted to the farthest away game. "I should have knowed it," he said, exasperated and turning to Kitty. "I suppose you knew all along that he was coming with us?" he fumed. "No, Grandpa," she said earnestly, "I didn't." There were 4 men at the table Cyclone had referred to. 2 of them were scruffy-looking hard cases. One of them was a bald-headed banker type, and the other one was dressed like a dandy. Dandy Jim Butler. When Dandy Jim saw Kitty and the others approaching, he smiled at them, then tossed his cards into the center of the table. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen," he said to the other players. "I have other business to tend to right now." "You quitting afore we can get even?" one of the 2 scruffy men said accusingly. "I'm sorry, gentlemen," Dandy Jim said. "Perhaps later we can have another go at it." He had scooped up his chips and hurried across the room to meet Kitty and the others. "What are you doing here?" Kitty asked as they met in the middle of the room and embraced. Cyclone turned away with a shrug. "I knowed it all the time," he muttered to himself. "I've been working my way down river. Figured I'd pick up a Mississippi boat and go on down to New Orleans," Dandy Jim said in answer to Kitty's question. "When I saw the Delta Queen, I remembered you saying that was the boat you'd be taking. I guess I sort of hoped I would get the trip you'd be on. Looks like my luck held." "Luck my foot," Cyclone grumbled beneath his breath. Jim heard the comment but didn't let on. He continued, "I've been worried about you, carrying all that money. I hope you haven't had any trouble." "Trouble?" Rap bellowed. "We ain't had nothing but trouble, but we still got our money." The 3 other players and the ones at the other table looked in their direction at Rap's outburst. "You darn fool," Cyclone said, slapping a big hand over Rap's mouth. He looked about the room and saw people looking their way. "You want to let the whole world know we got money?" "No," Rap said simply. "It ain't the whole world's business." "Just shut up," Cyclone ordered in a loud whisper. "Are you mad at me, Cy?" Rap's eyes turned sad. Cyclone checked himself. He'd done it again. His damn temper. He put a big hand on Rap's shoulder, looked him straight in the eye, and said calmly, "No, Rap, I ain't mad at you." Rap smiled. "Gee, thanks, Cy." No one, except Kitty, was paying any attention to Dandy Jim. He had put his hand out to shake, but the men all ignored it. "I see they all still like me," Jim said with a smile. Kitty looked around at her companions. She giggled. "Don't worry. You're growing on them. They just don't want you to know it." Jim laughed with her, then said, "I really would like to know what's been happening. We can't talk here. Let's find some place where we can." "We can talk back at our cabin. Come on, we'll show you the way," Kitty said. They took a leisurely walk to the upper deck, making small talk along the way, not daring to talk about anything that had happened on the trip. As they walked back, Jim pointed out the cabin he was occupying. It was 3 doors down and on the other side of the aisle, way from Kitty's and the others' rooms. It was next to the stairway they had just climbed. "Ain't that just ducky and convenient?" Cyclone groaned under his breath, but Kitty knew exactly what he was angry at. They all gathered in Kitty's and Cyclone's room. It was a bit cramped, but they all managed to get somewhat comfortable, at least for a while. After an hour, Rap was missing his afternoon tonic, as he called it, and he wanted to stretch out on his bunk. He, Jeremy, and Henry decided to go to their own room, next door. They left the others, stepped into the hallway, and turned to their own door. Jeremy worked his key in the lock, and just as he opened the door, he glanced up and to his left. The two scruffy-looking men that had been at the poker table with Dandy Jim Butler were at the end of the hall. They turned quickly and hurried for the stairway. Their boots clanged on the metal steps as they descended the stairs. Chapter 6. The afternoon wore on and the dinner hour approached. Jim, Kitty, and Cyclone rousted their three companions from their leisure, and they all went to dinner. Cyclone had mellowed toward the gambler as they spent the afternoon together. He did find something likable about the young man, but he sure as shootin' wasn't going to admit it to himself or anyone else. He watched at how comfortable Kitty and the gambler were with each other. He felt a bit of sadness, and he thought of Matt Starr, the young marshal that Kitty had been taken with, and he with her. But that was something that could never be. Kitty, he and the others were wanted outlaws, and it was Matt Starr's duty to bring them all to justice, if that's what you would call it, because it was justice that the Wildcats themselves were seeking. Kitty had pledged herself to seek revenge against Simon Price, banker and benefactor of Fortune City, Arizona. Until her quest was over, she could never consider the normal life of a young girl. She already had her heart broken, once over Matt Starr, and recently over a man much like Dandy Jim Butler himself. Dinner was pleasant. The others couldn't ignore Jim forever. Soon barriers started to fall, and conversation became cordial. Eventually, laughter ensued, and all seemed to be having a good time. Rap was a wonder to watch. The way he waded into the food and the drink was reminiscent of a man off of an island by himself and seeing the outside world for the very first time. It was fully dark by the time they finished their meal. The boat had been well lit for the evening, and they all walked out onto the deck. The air was cool and crisp, and there was a slight breeze that tugged at clothes and hair. The river brushed away beneath them, and the water whispered against the hull. There was the shimmering light of the moon above dancing on the surface of the rippling waters. They lingered a while, watching moon and clouds in the dark sky mingling with the stillness of the night, the whine of the engine, and the steady churning of the giant paddle wheel aft. Night chill drifted in, and they all decided to call it a day and night and head back to their staterooms. Except for Dandy Jim. His business was one of the night, and he would be heading off to the gaming tables to once again try his luck. Dandy Jim hadn't been playing long when he felt the tap on his shoulder. He was playing at a different table than he had been at earlier in the day. His back had been to entrance of the lounge from the deck. He didn't see Kitty and the others come in. When he turned, he saw Kitty there. She was wide-eyed, and her hand was still on his shoulder. "Jim," she said in a whisper. There was excitement in her voice. "I've got to talk to you." "Can it wait?" He glanced once again at the 5 cards in his hand. "No, it can't." Dandy Jim stared into her big green eyes. His lips turned up on the ends in a slight smile. He nodded. Then to the other men in the game, he said, "I'm out for this one." He tossed his cards down, straight flush, all diamonds, ace, king, queen, 10, and jack of diamonds. He started to rise from his chair. "Hold my place, gentlemen," he said. "Your luck this time. I'll be back later." "Oh, Jim," Kitty sighed, looking down at Jim's discarded cards. "I'm sorry." "That's all right, kitten," he reassured her as he escorted her away from the table, the others close behind. "What is it?" Jim asked as they stepped out onto the deck. "We were robbed?" Kitty blurted it in a loud whisper. "Robbed?" "Yes. When we got back from dinner, we found both rooms were broken into. They trashed everything as if they were looking for something. And they found our money in my room. I had it in a hat box, and I covered it up with all our luggage in a closet." "Were any other passengers robbed?" Jim asked. "No, at least I don't think so. I haven't heard anyone else complaining." "Did you report the theft to the captain?" "No, we can't do that, considering who we are and where we got the money in the first place." How would anyone know you had money to steal? Jim asked. Remember, this afternoon when Rap blurted out about us having money? You think someone in the lounge noticed and came looking? Yes, Jeremy put in. Those two men you were playing with this afternoon? Rap and I saw them in our hallway this afternoon. They may have been checking out which rooms were ours. They saw Rap, Henry, and I go into our room. They probably hit ours first. That's why it was trashed too. When they didn't find anything, they must have tried Kitty's and Cy's room. Dandy Jim turned slightly so he could glance back into the lounge. Those same two men were playing at a far table. They had several stacks of chips in front of them on the table. They do seem to be pretty flush tonight, Jim mused. I pretty much cleaned them out earlier today. I didn't like playing with them. They were obviously playing partners and pretending they didn't know each other. That's why I found a different game tonight. I didn't want to play with them again. I did wonder where they got another stake. Then to Kitty he asked, Did they get the entire 20,000? No, Kitty said. There was 15,000 in the hat box. I had kept out 5,000 for clothes and expenses. I still have over 3,000 in my purse. She hefted her little handbag. Good, Jim said. Give it to me. What? Kitty was taken by surprise. I should have known it, Cyclone snapped. Henry snapped to attention. His eyes darkened beneath the thick lenses of his eyeglasses. You can't be thinking what I think you're thinking, Jim pleaded. We know what you're thinking, all right, Cyclone groaned. Cy, you're wrong about that, Jim protested. I ain't wrong about that, Cyclone grumbled. You've been after our money all along. You're wrong, Cyclone, Jim protested. I'm not after your money. Well, you're sure as shooting after my granddaughter. Same thing. Jim shook his head in exasperation. Then he ignored Cyclone and turned to Kitty. I'm just going to put it with my own stake and get in the game with those two birds. I'll fleece them and get it all back. I believe you, Jim, but, what if you lose? Kitty asked. Kitty, for shame! How can you think such a thing? Well, Kitty was still reluctant. I don't lose. Kitty's eyes roamed to the table that Jim had just been playing at, thinking about the hand he had tossed away. Jim's eyes followed hers. He smiled. Only when I want to, kitten. Only when I want to. 2 hours later, the Cyclone Kid and Arapaho Brown were still on the deck outside the lounge. They had been watching the card game in progress all evening. Dandy Jim's pile of chips had been steadily growing, while the two scruffy men and the other players' stacks were dwindling. Along about 1 o'clock in the morning, the game was winding down. The other tables had long since cleared, and only the one game had remained. Finally, one of the two scruffy men tossed in his cards and pushed himself angrily to his feet. He scooped up what chips were left in front of him and stalked across the lounge floor, heading for the deck. Rap and Cyclone stepped quickly back into the shadows, one on each side of the lounge entrance. Rap to the right and Cy to the left. The man came out onto the deck, muttering something low and under his breath. Obviously, totally ticked off about losing. He passed by Rap. Rap stepped out and wrapped his big arms around the man's chest and arms. One giant paw reached over the man's mouth and muted his protestations. The man's feet lifted off the floor, and Rap was pushing him toward the side rail of the boat. Cyclone hustled up behind the two flailing legs and feet. He caught the man by his ankles and helped Rap carry him to the rail. Swinging the body to and fro in widening arcs, Cy and Rap built up enough momentum that on the third swing, they loosened their grips and let the man fly over the rail and plunge downward into the dark waters below. There was a momentary, muted scream and splash that could hardly be heard beneath the din of the engine and the churning of the paddle wheel. Nice night for a moonlight swim, Cyclone chuckled, slapping his partner on the shoulder. Aw, Cy, Rap said. You know I can't swim. It wasn't long before the other partner quit the game. They had deliberately left separately, hoping that no one would know they were playing partners in the game. "Get ready," Cy said. "Time for more fun." They both stepped back into the shadows. It was another hour before Dandy Jim Butler arrived back at Kitty's and Cy's room. He flashed a wad of bills up in front of his face and smiled. "Got it all back and a few more," he gloated. "Seems to be about 20,000 here." He shoved the bills toward Kitty. She grabbed them quickly and held them close to her breast like a bouquet of flowers. Her eyes glowed. She leaped forward, wrapping her arms around Jim's neck, and gave him a big, long kiss. "I'll be horn-swallowed," Cyclone groaned to himself. Kitty, suddenly aware of herself and hearing her grandpa, pushed herself back from Jim. Money still in one hand, she smoothed out her gown with the other. She stared at Cyclone. "Now, Grandpa," she said, "aren't you ashamed of yourself for doubting Jim? See, he saved our money once again." "Yeah," he mumbled with defeat. And to himself, he thought, "Guess you don't need your old grandpa no more as long as you got that consarned dandy man." Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid and the River Pirates. The Mississippi Belle's paddle wheel whirled steadily, spewing water behind the large craft and shoving the bulky vessel forward on the waters. Moonlight shimmered off the surface of the great Mississippi River. Light streamed from the windows of the riverboat, and the strains of lively music drifted out upon the waters. As the mighty craft sailed into a narrow stretch, watchful eyes peered out from the riverbanks. They watched as the hulking shape of the riverboat glided through rougher water. Big Mike McGurk and his river pirates stole silently out of the darkness of trees and made their way to a waiting log raft that had been moored along the bank. As the big Mississippi Belle approached, McGurk and his 5 henchmen piled onto the raft, and using long poles, they shoved the makeshift vehicle off the bank and out into the waters toward the Belle. Upon reaching the riverboat, McGurk and 3 men climbed silently up its side, while 2 men stayed below to keep the raft in position for a getaway. In a matter of minutes, McGurk and his men burst into the ship's lounge. The room was filled with people dining, drinking, and gambling. "Don't anyone move," McGurk bellowed as he made his entrance. A pistol was in each hand, and he was brandishing them menacingly about. "This is a stick-up." His men were beside him, guns out. "Not today," a deep voice behind them warned. McGurk and his men spun around on their feet in surprise. Before them stood 5 stalwart figures, 3 old men, a boy, and a girl. They all had guns out and aimed at the river pirates. They were the Wildcat Gang. Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid stood in the middle of the group. Before McGurk and his men could bring their pistols up to bear on the interlopers, the Wildcats let loose with their weapons. Lead pellets smashed guns in the outlaws' hands, and the broken pieces of metal dropped to the floor. Wildcat Kitty stepped out of the way as her male companions darted forward, attacking the pirates bodily, picking them up, carrying them out on the deck, and hurling them over the rail onto the raft below. The raft, feeling the sudden weight, slipped, tipping everyone overboard into the water. The Mississippi Belle moved on down the river while the bad guys struggled to stay afloat. Once again, Wildcat Kitty, the Cyclone Kid, and the Wildcat Gang had meted out justice and saved the day. "Oh, isn't there anything they can't do?" Little Kathy said, closing the dime novel. "Do you really think any of that is true?" Her brother Jimmy said, taking the book from his sister's little hands and looking at the cover. He smoothed the crinkled cover out and unfolded the dog-eared right corner. "Who cares?" Kathy said. "These stories sure are fun to read." She looked out the window that filled the peak of the barn and saw their grandfather puttering in the front lawn. She grabbed the book back from Jimmy and said, "We'd better put this back in the trunk and go downstairs before Grandpa knows we've been up here in the loft." She put the book back into the old trunk with the ornate lettering on its side and closed the lid. These stories could wait for another rainy day. Chapter 7. St. Louis was a busy city, and Rapp noticed how many more tin horses were scuttling about town compared to Denver or even Kansas City. By now, he was getting used to the chug-chug of their motors and the fog of burning oil spewing out into the air. Maybe there was something about Dandy Jim's prediction of them replacing horses, after all. One thing was sure, Rapp had said to the others, he would never ride one of those things. He may be getting used to seeing them, but he was still scared of them. They would wheel around corners at the tremendous speed of 10 or 15 miles an hour. Their riders wearing bright white or yellow dusters and funny-looking masks over their eyes. Jeremy told Rapp these were goggles, and Rapp thought that was a funny word. "Now that's more like it," Rapp said when he spied the trolley cars drawn by teams of big, strong draft horses. "We will be riding on one of those, Senor," Paco Morales explained to Rapp and the others. Paco was a small, wiry man. His once wavy hair was now thin and gray. He was dressed in a three-piece suit that was too big for him. He had met Kitty and the others at the dock when they disembarked from the Delta Queen. Kitty had run to him and hugged him tightly, and when released, Jeremy was right there with arm and hand extended to greet his old friend. With introductions all the way around completed, Kitty, Cyclone, Dandy Jim, Jeremy, Rapp, and Chief Henry all set off to Paco's apartment in an old wooden frame, two-story building on Lexington Avenue. Rapp was delighted to board the brightly colored trolley and take a seat on a bench that ran lengthwise of the car. Kitty and Cyclone squeezed into the seat beside him. Jim, Jeremy, and Henry stood in the aisle, grasping the round handholds that draped from the ceiling of the car. They braced their legs in a stance to steady themselves as the big horses started up again, pulling the hulking car forward. Rapp watched enthusiastically at the sights through the window on the other side of the car. On another track, horses were pulling a trolley in the opposite direction and passed them by. As they passed another intersection, he saw another trolley on another street heading away from them. "Look at that," Rapp exclaimed. "That one ain't got no horses at all. They run on gas too?" "No," said Dandy Jim. "They run on electricity." What?" "Electricity. See those wires above it? There is another wire attached to the trolley car that connects with that wire. There's power in the wire. That's what makes the car move." "I don't see no power," Rapp said. "You can't see it, but it's there. See those poles alongside the street?" "Yeah." "See those three crossbeams, each one spaced apart high up on the pole. And see those wires attached to them. There's power in those wires too. They make lights go on at night and do all sorts of other things too, Rapp. This is the modern world, and it's here to stay." "Not back home," Rapp said. "Not now, but soon, Rapp. Soon. I don't think I'm gonna like the modern world." Paco's apartment was small, and the furnishings were bare. There was only one bed in the room, but with Paco being a small man, it could possibly accommodate one other person. "I ain't sleeping with no mechs," Rapp protested. "Rapp," Kitty scolded. "Paco's my friend. You apologize to him right now." Rapp's jaw dropped at the reprimand. His eyes dimmed with hurt. "It is all right, Kitty," Paco said. His English was very good. "I take no offense." He smiled at Rapp. Sheepishly, Rapp smiled back. After the problems they had with Rapp while staying in a hotel in Denver, Kitty and Cyclone did not want a repeat of that action. They would be staying in St. Louis much longer than the one-night stay in Denver, so they thought it advisable that Paco's apartment would be more suitable than a hotel. It had been decided that Henry and Rapp would stay with Paco. Jeremy would also stay to make sure that Rapp behaved himself. Between Paco and Jeremy, they could see to it that there was food and meals provided without having to go out to restaurants. Rapp was somewhat disappointed, as he had enjoyed eating out and didn't like the idea of being cooped up in the small apartment. Jeremy assured him that they would get out some, see the sights, and eat out as long as he behaved himself. Behave myself? Rap protested. I ain't no little boy, you know. We know you're not, Kitty said. You just might not understand some of the city ways and not know how you are supposed to act. That's all. Well, if you say so, sweetie. Rap smiled. Being somewhat smaller than his two companions, Jeremy would fit in the bed with Paco. Rap and Henry would sleep on the floor. I think I'll just sleep in this nice chair, Henry said. He sat gingerly into the beat-up cushion of the thread-bare stuffed chair. It looked like it had had some color in the past, but now it was just shoddy brown. With the others settled in at Paco's apartment, Kitty, Cyclone, and Dandy Jim set off with Paco to the nursing home on Vandeventer Avenue, which was within walking distance a few blocks away. Paco had deliberately found accommodations close by so he could check on Kitty's mother every day. The Vandeventer nursing home was a 3-story red brick building on the right-hand side of the street. It was a plain building, probably some 70 years old. Power lines fed from poles to the structure. Paco led the way through the tall door. Frosted glass filled the top half of it. In gold lettering, the words, "We care and share for your family," were inscribed in the opaqueness. The entrance opened into a small vestibule where visitors could leave overshoes or jackets. Beyond it was a medium-sized room that served as a lobby. Directly ahead was a large desk. A plump, matronly-looking lady looked up, peering through wire-rimmed spectacles. She wore a white nurse's uniform and flipped-up nurse's cap in the thickness of her black, but beginning to gray hair. "Hello, Paco," she greeted with a smile. Then to the others she said, "You must be Abigail's family. Paco told me you were coming. She'll be so glad to see you." "How is she today?" Paco asked, as he did every day. "I think today is one of her good days, but be careful not to tire her too much. The sight of all of you just might be too exciting." "I know," said Paco. "I'm sure," she said, as Paco led his entourage away and on down the hall. Halfway down the hall, Paco stopped in front of a closed door on the left. There was a button on the wall next to it. Paco pushed it hard, and it buzzed loudly. "What's that?" Cyclone asked nervously. "You'll see," said Paco. They waited a moment. They could hear sounds on the other side of the door, then it opened. An old man sat on a stool in the back left side corner. There was a lever protruding from the wall. "Step in," Paco said. He stepped in and turned around to face the open door. Dandy Jim and Kitty did the same. Cyclone, still facing the rear wall, was a bit bewildered, and then turned around as his companions had. The door in front of them closed. The old man in the corner pulled the lever on the wall. Cyclone felt a jolt beneath his feet and needed to steady himself. What in tarnation is going on here? He was almost stammering. "Relax, Cy," Dandy Jim assured him. "This is an elevator." "I thought you said that was some kind of power," Cyclone said nervously. "That was electricity, Cy. This is an elevator, but electricity does power it." Just then the elevator stopped and the old man opened the door. The hall in front of them looked just like the hall they had been on when they entered the elevator. Cyclone grunted. "What just happened?" Kitty and Jim stepped out of the car. Cyclone followed. The hall may have looked the same when the car door opened, but once in the hall, Cyclone could see that everything had changed. There were open doors on each side of the long hallway. There was hustle and bustle all about. Women in white uniforms and men with long white coats zipped and zapped in and out of the rooms. "That little room changed everything," Cyclone exclaimed. "How'd it do that? It's a devil machine, I tell you." "Grandpa," Kitty said, "the elevator didn't change anything. It just transported us to a different floor." "It changed the floor too? It is a devil machine then?" "No, Grandpa. We were on the first floor before. Now we're on the third floor." "How could that be?" Cyclone looked confused. "Never mind, Senor Cy," Paco said. "Believe me, Everything is all right. Just follow me. You'll see. Paco led the way to the room at the end of the hall and on the right. As they entered the room, Cyclone could see straight across the room to the large window that looked out on the street side of the building. He could see they were high up, looking out on rooftops. Sounds of busy streets below drifted upwards and could be heard clearly through the glass. The roar of a crowd could be heard somewhere in the distance. Next to the window, a frail figure sat in a wicker chair. The back and seat of the chair were padded with thick cushions. Her faded green eyes had turned to light gray and were staring out the window. She didn't hear her visitors approaching. "Senora," Paco said, drawing her attention, "I have a big surprise for you." Her head turned slowly in Paco's direction. They didn't register recognition of anything out of the ordinary at first. Kitty's heart leapt in her throat. Tears began to mist in her eyes, and she shuffled forward slowly, fearing that her mother longer knew her, but her pace increased to an almost run as she saw the smile on the old woman's face. Kitty dropped to one knee, and her arms wrapped around her mother's shoulders. Her face buried itself in the thin neck. She could feel the warmth of Abigail Carlin's hair. She hugged tight, and soon she could feel the feeble embrace her mother could return. Abigail burst into tears that dripped onto Kitty's shoulder. The hug lingered. Cyclone, still standing in the doorway, watched the heartfelt reunion with a bit of sadness mixed with joy. He tried to swallow the hard lump in his throat. His eyes watered a bit. He wiped at them and smiled. Memories flashed by. He could see a young Abigail, her long auburn hair swishing behind her head and spilling out onto soft shoulders, holding a young Tom Carlin as they danced at a church picnic. He saw himself, younger. He saw his wife, smiling and laughing. They were all together, the four of them around the supper table. The good days, before a heartbroken Cyrus Carlin stood, hat in hand, head bowed, standing over a fresh grave. Before he rode away, abandoning all. Before he became the Cyclone Kid. Kitty and Abigail's embrace waned, and they pulled back from each other, each one gazing unbelieving into each other's eyes. "Oh, Kitty, is it really you? Paco told me you were coming, but I just couldn't believe it." Her voice was thin and faltering. "Yes, it's me, Mom," Kitty assured her. "How are you?" she asked, as her eyes roamed about Abigail's frail, thin body. Abigail's face was drawn and pale. More lines were etched in her face, and withered flesh hung in loose ropes beneath her chin and along her throat. "I've wanted to come see you for so long. I've really missed you." "And you," Abigail answered. She looked past Kitty, over her shoulder. She didn't seem to acknowledge the two men standing in the doorway. "Did Jeremy come with you?" she asked, concern in her voice. "Yes, Mom," Kitty answered, "but he'll be along later." Abigail seemed a bit disappointed. Her eyelids drooped. "But there's someone else here who wants to see you." She tried to make her words sound upbeat and erase her mother's disappointment. She nodded to Cyclone. With hat held in his hand, he came forward slowly, unsure that he should be there, yet elated to see his daughter-in-law again. "Abigail?" he said as he came close. He could see her gazing quizzically at him, as if seeking to find some recognition. Her expression went blank. Again, the Cyclone Kid had to wipe droplets from his eyes. He bent down on one knee. His old bones creaked, and he felt the pain of his ever-increasing rheumatism. He peered closely into Abigail's thin face. Expectancy and fear filled his gaze. "Abby?" Cy said cautiously. "It's me. Remember." Abigail's pale face seemed to brighten. Her lips turned at both ends into a slight smile. "Cy, is it really you? Am I dreaming? Or have I passed on and we finally meet again?" "No, it's me all right, Abby," Cy said. "I was afraid you wouldn't know me. I know I've aged some since I saw you last, but you recognized me. That's something, really something." I was afraid that if you did know me, you wouldn't want to see me, after what all I'd done." "Oh, Cy," she said, "I know how much you hurt. I never blamed you." She raised her arms as if to reach for him. Cy fell forward toward her, throwing his big arms about her and hugged her tight. He stroked her hair lovingly, and his shoulders shook as he sobbed. Chapter 8. "I ain't eatin' none of that Mex food," Arapaho Brown blustered. "It's not Mexican rap," Dandy Jim assured him. "Seems to me